I would have these conversations that were confusing to me, where you would be debating a so-called liberal, and I would find myself taking the liberal side, like in favor of free speech, or my default suspicion of corporate power, or concentrations of power anywhere, because it's a threat to the individual, or in favor of due process, or I would take a position that I heard liberals of my childhood take, and the liberal I'm debating would be like, nope, if Google says it, it's true. Or, if you're accused, prove yourself innocent. Or if what you say is offensive, you don't have a right to say it. I'd be like, wait a second. This is a mirror image of what I grew up with. So actually, to answer your question as honestly as I can, I don't know if they ever really meant what they said.
Tucker Carlson, welcome to the Rubin
Hey,
Report.
Dave.
I am glad to have you here, my friend.
I'm glad to be here. I love this.
I don't know that anyone has ever walked in here and been more impressed by the Rubin Report.
Because I work in television, so I know what this is, and it's just the coolest thing I've seen in a long time.
Are you jealous?
Are you joking? Yes, I'm jealous.
You have millions and millions of viewers.
I drive across.
You have a massive staff.
But I don't have the control that you have, which is wonderful.
Yeah, control. All right, so speaking of control, I have only one goal for the next hour, which is to some point say something so ludicrous that you stare at me with that face.
I may do that.
Where did the face come from?
It's totally organic.
Everyone, the memes that come out of that face.
It's totally organic. The funny thing is that's just my face at rest, which is golden retriever-like.
Yeah.
I'm a mouth breather. And when I first started this show, I got complaints about it internally. And the idea was it's too embarrassing, you click a moron. But I can't stop, I can't help myself. So I'm not a super self-aware person. I'm not a mirror user, for example. Because if you work in TV and you become really self-conscious, it destroys you and makes you insecure. So I just am trained after 20 years not to think about the way I look. And I didn't even know that I look like a moron when I'm listening, but I do. And I'm not changing.
Well, I know you're not BSing, because even just now when you were in the green room and my girl was putting makeup on you, you sat there for literally 2 seconds. You were like, don't do anything. You didn't even look at the mirror. You were looking at me. And
you can go crazy, as you know, in TV. If you start to think about how other people perceive you, you just drown in Lake Me, you know, and I don't want that.
All right, so I'm glad to have you here for a couple reasons. We're going to get into the book, and obviously we're kind of simpatico on what I think are the big issues of the day related to free speech and all that stuff. But I will be totally honest with you. Years ago, when I first saw you on Crossfire on CNN, I was not a fan. You
weren't alone in that.
I thought, here's this bow tie wearing guy who was, seemingly kind of smug and whatever. And I was a lefty at the time, so we were really polar opposites politically.
Yeah.
But everything has shifted enough that we are kind of allies now, and I actually think that's kind of cool. So before we do anything else, tell me about little Tucker Carlson. People know about Tucker Carlson that eviscerates socialists all day.
What was I like as a kid?
Yeah.
Well, I grew up here in Southern California, and we lived in Studio City. And I think I've always been the same, anti-authoritarian, for the individual, against the group. I hate bullies. I hate being bullied more than anything. And so I found myself, and I've always been this way, in a scenario where everyone is forced to sort of nod in bovine agreement about something, my instinct is always to be the one guy who's like, no. And so I haven't changed at all. The particulars of my political beliefs have changed because America has changed so dramatically. I'm 49, so in the last 40 years, it's become a different country. And a lot of the things that I thought would work haven't worked. A lot of the things I thought were not threatening turned out to be threatening. So, my views have changed, but my instincts have remained, I think, consistent over time.
Yeah. Were you always political, or were your parents political?
I was always political.
Yeah?
Well, I was always interested in history. And my father was a non-conformist, I would say. That's an understatement. And his baseline position was, just because everybody says it doesn't mean it's true. And the answers to the way people are found in history, because the one immutable fact of history is human nature. Like, it literally does not change. And you see consistent themes over time. And so if you want to understand what's happening, look backward, and you will, just pretty conventional stuff, but now it sounds kind of radical. But basically, my main influence was my dad. I grew up with my dad and my brother. And again, his view was, just because all the chin tuggers are saying it does not prove it.
Yeah. Does that seem like a pretty obvious through line to your success right now? Because It's like every day there is some other groupthink, lunacy that it's like, these people then go on your show, and I always think it's hilarious because it's like, do they know what they're getting into? You know what I mean? It's like, they think they're going to beat you, and...
Well, but they don't actually have the same goals for the debate that I do. So I'm linear and literal and old-fashioned, and I go into it, believing that I can win the person over with superior reasoning or, a larger and more compelling fact set or whatever. They're coming to this believing they've already won because they have superior virtue. So they're having a theological conversation. I'm having a political debate, and too often we talk right past each other.
Yeah, that's interesting. A theological conversation. A couple of people have mentioned on the show. My friend Peter Boghossian, who's a philosophy professor who's been on a few times, he calls this sort of new leftism a secular religion.
Of course.
Do you view that?
Look, I'm an Episcopalian, so I know what happened because the Episcopal Church was the church of America's ruling class. Our national cathedral is an Episcopal church. So our culture was rooted in mainline Protestantism. I mean, this was a Protestant country. And our rulers, whether they were like literally Protestant or not, internalized the values of that faith. And then within like a 20-year period, the faith evaporated. The Episcopal Church barely exists anymore. And certainly as a national force, it's irrelevant. But that didn't eliminate the religious impulse within people, which is inherent. It's innate. We're born that way. We worship something in the end. Whether, it doesn't need to be God. And so they've transferred that religious impulse to the political sphere. They're making the same arguments that 19th century Protestants made, especially the Calvinists. Like, I am saved. Like, I know this. That's my baseline assumption. I'm one of God's elect. You are not. Mm-hmm. If you go into any conversation like that, nothing will be resolved because it's already been decided.
Yeah. Well, it's good versus evil. And it's like,
exactly.
Why
That's
would
exactly
you
what it
that?
is.
Yeah. Was it always like this, though?
No, it wasn't like. Well,
so what? Give me some markers of when you saw things kind of start to change.
I mean, I'm kind of, I'm not an intellectual. I'm a talk show host, so I'm a little.
Well, now we have our promo clip.
Right. Well, it's true. I mean, that's what I do. So it took me a while to see the outline. I mean, this all comes kind of slowly to me because I'm caught in an earlier time just by virtue of my age. And so I would have these conversations that were confusing to me where you would be debating a so-called liberal, and I would find myself taking the liberal side, like in favor of free speech, or my default suspicion of corporate power or concentrations of power anywhere because it's a threat to the individual, or in favor of due process, or I would take a position that I heard liberals of my childhood take, and the liberal I'm debating would be like, nope, if Google says it, it's true, or if you're accused, prove yourself innocent, or if what you say is offensive, you don't have a right to say it. I'd be like, wait a second. This is a mirror image of what I grew up with. So actually, to answer your question as honestly as I can, I don't know if they ever really meant what they said. I really don't. It's possible that the pursuit of power and the empowerment of the Democratic Party was always the goal, and that was just the disguise they used in order to achieve it in 1979. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Do you think we'd be in a healthier situation if there was a sane Democratic Party, even if all the policies were against everything that Tucker Carlson believes? Yeah.
That's the point of my book. The feng shui is off. So for like 100 years, you had one party, which was the corporate party, the Republican Party, the country club party, the party of the ruling class. And the other party existed, in effect, to keep it in check. And to say, wait a second, you're getting rich because all these people are working really hard. So you need to think about their interests. And a bunch of different things happened. The value of labor dropped because of technology to the point where it's not even worth representing the working class because they're not worth anything, actually. This was the calculation of the Democratic Party. And so basically what you have is this weird alignment where the leadership of the Republican Party represents corporate interests and the leadership of the Democratic Party represents corporate interests. And there's no one to represent the middle class. And that, again, the balance is off. You need a vigorous party standing up and saying, whoa, wait a second, you need balance. Always you need balance.
Yeah, so is that the part of this that's sort of scary for our future, and that's kind of what you're going for in the book, is that if one side completely implodes, which it seems more likely as we're taping this at the moment, that the Democrats are just going to absolutely implode, that it's not as if all the conservative policies that you might like would suddenly take root. It's that we would actually tilt in some really bizarre...
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, this is why marriage as an institution works, because there's like another person pushing back against your bad instincts or balancing you out, you know? And what's true at home is probably true on a national scale, on a political scale. And yes, you absolutely need a vigorous and principled opposition party always, or else you've got something really ugly. Then you've got the monoparty, which is kind of what we have.
Yeah, you know Jordan Peterson, who I know you admire also.
I do.
One of the lines when he's talking about politics, it's interesting you brought up marriage. He'll always say, you know, it's like a fight with your spouse. You don't want to beat them because then you're married to a loser. You want to give them a chance to figure out something so that you'll be able to move forward. And, and we seem at this, we're at this odd place right now where it's like, one side is trying to beat the other side is trying to beat the other side, and the rest of us, which I think is actually most of us, are just like...
That's true. You don't want to beat your spouse because you're married to a loser, but you're also a loser if you're married to a loser. The point is, you're implicated in the future of the other side because in the end, you're all in this together, even though you're coming from it from different perspectives. So we're all Americans. So in the same way that crushing your spouse doesn't actually win you any kind of meaningful victory or a victory you'd want, crushing your fellow Americans doesn't improve your life or your country. So like, you know, you don't want any of this. I totally agree.
It's going to lead to something really bad, actually.
Really ugly. And everybody who's paying any kind of attention senses it on an animal level. This is moving in a really ominous direction.
A lot of people are getting their news from this show, shows like this, Shapiro, Rogan, all of these guys. That's kind of worrying too at some level, right? And I say that, I'm talking about guys that I love, but like, just that, you know, the fact checking is different here than say it would be on cable news. Not that cable news has done a great job of it all the time.
But you're right. I mean, we're always a point on a continuum, and we're in the middle of a cycle where the media are being reinvented completely. And you're right. I mean, the problem with individual operators, solo guys on YouTube, is they have so much less to lose than a television network does, that the incentives to get the facts right and be responsible are, of course, much lower. The problem, as you well know better than anybody, is that the media have so discredited themselves that it's like, it's so obviously propaganda.
Yeah, but did you ever think it could be that bad?
No,
like,
I never did.
As bad as it is now, where every day I look at a story from CNN or Politico and forget BuzzFeed and all those other, like forget the really bad ones, Vox, and it's like everything you guys are doing, every headline, the way every Republican has a picture that they look awful in the picture, Democrats look great. Like every little thing, it's like they're just smashing us with it.
They've just turned it up to 11. And I grew up in a media family. I mean, my dad was anchor here in LA of ABC, and so I have always lived in this world, and I always thought the media are liberal, but I was totally wrong about that. They're not ideologues, actually. They're party people. That's what I totally missed.
Yeah.
They are loyal to the party. They feel powerless except as part of a group. That is the main distinction between left and right in this country. And so whatever the Democratic Party's imperatives are, they will act on them. If the Democratic Party invaded Canada tomorrow, you would see, I'm serious, they'd be like, you know, these Canadians, they live among us, they're, you know what I mean, they're a fifth column, like they would actually, it doesn't matter what the party does, they will defend it. Once you understand that, then it all makes sense. They feel threatened. That's the truth. And you and people like you are the main threat to them. It's not me, actually. I'm on a competing medium, but in the same medium. They know that their power is ebbing. And when you feel like you're losing control, that's when you try to assert control. Yeah. That's when the most ludicrous propaganda comes, when you feel like, you know, oh my gosh, they're not listening to me. I have to yell.
But that's the funny part is and I tweet this all the time. It's like, if these guys had just been like pretty bad, I think it would have been tolerable. People would have, because it had been happening for so long, people kind of wouldn't have noticed. And maybe they could have got a little worse and we would have been okay with it. But it's like they've just completely bottomed out. And
well, this is one of the criticisms of Trump that has a lot of truth in it. When people are like, well, he's a destroyer. He destroys everything he touches. You know, probably an overstatement, but he does. You know, you get close, you sit and stare at Trump all day, and you're going to burn out your retinas. Okay, you are. And that's one of the things I try not to do. I don't do a show about Trump. I didn't write a book about Trump. I'm not against Trump. I think Trump is useful and a truth teller in some ways, but the people who obsess about Trump are destroyed. And that would include his opponents, maybe especially his opponents.
So what would you do to get some of those people back? If they're out there now, the ones that really are overboard on Trump that I haven't, I've been able to reach some liberals, some good lefties and liberals.
Yeah.
So that, okay, we can put a hand out for them. But for the people that are really feeling like they're buying all the nonsense that this guy is Hitler and all of this really, do you have any technique that gives them a little bit of an out?
Sure. I almost never argue about Trump. I really try not to. I mean, the platonic ideal for me of a show is never mentioning Trump, because I try to take the long view. I mean, look, other shows have different roles. Everybody sees like, his or her specific task, but I feel like mine is to try to take the long view. Not easy in the middle of this news cycle, of course. I get caught up all the time in the bullshit of the day, but I really try to think about, like, well, how would this look 10 years from now? Like, Trump will be gone. I'll be gone. We'll all be gone because we actually die at the end, it turns out. So, but I want the country
Hopefully
to continue.
Not 10 years from now.
Not 10 years. But I'm just saying, like, what kind of country do you want? That's the question. Do you want to live in a place where the individual has the right to dissent? And I think most people would say, yes, I do.
Yeah. Is that why the free speech stuff has become so important to you?
Well,
I think because you hit that more than
foundational. I mean, that's just, if they can tell you what to say, they can control what you think. And if they can control what you think, you're not fully human. And so you're not fighting for a political party or an ideology, you're fighting for your humanity. I believe that. That's what I was taught as a child by liberals.
Yeah.
And they were right, and I bought it then, by the way. And so the ACLU stood up for Clarence Brandenburg, who was not only literally a Klansman from Ohio, but a moron, literally a moron. He was the least appealing person ever, and they staked their entire credibility on defending this guy. Why'd they do that? They did it, of course, to preserve the absolute right of free speech for the rest of us, and they made the country better. When you abandon that, dude, it's over.
And now you see what comes out of the ACLU, and you're like, you're not defending free speech. You're clearly a progressive group at this
They're
point.
opposing free speech.
Nice
they issued a statement saying, some speech is just too offensive. Really? Because you defended the right of Nazis to march through Skokie, which everyone forgets had the highest percentage of Holocaust survivors of any town, like outside Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the most offensive thing you could do. And they defended it, and they lost a lot of money doing it. Like, they lost a ton of donations doing it, but they defended the principle. And I noticed you've got Nadine Strausson's book.
Yeah, we talked about this here.
So there are people like her or Dershowitz or these former ACLU board members who are like totally bewildered by this. Not because we care about the ACLU as an institution, who cares, it's some dumb nonprofit, but because the principles are literally foundational.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump back for just a second here. So I want to talk about Fox generally.
Yeah.
So first off, you guys are doing something right. And I don't mean just you here. Clearly, if you look at the ratings, I just looked at this thing and it's like the last bottom 20 shows are all CNN.
Yeah.
The top 10 are basically all Fox. Maybe there's one MSNBC show in there. Beyond just you, what do you think that Fox is just doing right?
Being slightly different. I mean, I would argue that I can only speak for my show. I'm only in charge of an hour of 24, but that it's actually worth defending the principles as distinct from the individuals or the political figures. And over time, like, you're not embarrassed to do that. It's worth doing. But I think as a business matter and just sort of a matter of life, if you're the guy who's not entirely with the herd and you're like, actually, no, it's a little bit different. You go to the 19 other stores and you can buy this one product and I've got a different product. I mean, why is that bad?
Yeah, so that just seems obvious. That's
well, what's so interesting is how offensive that is.
Yeah.
It's like Fox, and I've worked at CNN, I've worked at MSNBC, I worked at PBS, I worked at Esquire. I mean, I've worked at like a million different liberal publications and television channels, and they're all selling exactly the same product. And then there's Fox in the mainstream landscape that's different. Just one channel is different. And the overwhelming feeling is that should not be allowed. Like, I can't believe that they're allowed to say what they're saying. We need to shut them down.
Well, that's the irony. It's like, you guys are the only ones that will put me on. I will gladly go on CNN or MSNBC.
You can't get on those channels?
I've never been asked. I can't just show up there and bang on the door, but you guys call me. And every time I've done your show, it's live. I never know what you're going to ask me.
Of course.
And same thing with some of the other shows. And it's like, I will go where I can talk to people.
Exactly.
But I don't want to be edited and misrepresented, so I don't know that I would trust a lot of these other people.
No.
Okay, so that's sort of what.
But it's just so uninteresting. I mean, if everybody's repeating the exact same pieties, diversity is our strength, our children are our future, or whatever the sort of banality is that you think is profound. If everybody is saying the exact same thing, like, that's just boring. I like to have people on who surprise me. Like, what? Do you know what I mean? Like that, just because, again, I'm more curious. I mean, I'm a human being. I want to think about things.
Does it ever drive you crazy to just be in the constraints of what television is?
Yeah,
you know,
of
like, because we've done segments where it's like, you know, we've got maybe 6 minutes, and I feel like I just started, and then you're like, Rubin, I'll see you next time, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I was a writer before I went into TV, and one of the reasons that I failed a couple of times pretty spectacularly in TV is because I didn't understand the medium and I didn't respect it. I was like, I'm a writer, I'm a deep person, here I am in this shallow medium. And what I didn't understand is that TV is it's a completely different thing. Yeah. And it's got its own requirements and its own rules. And you need to understand what it's capable of. And it's capable of great things, it's just not capable of everything. You know what I mean? It's not capable of explaining complex concepts. Just that's not what TV's about. It's not what it's for.
Tucker, you are not in your studio, you're not in a suit. You appear to be in some sort of secret bunker area with books and pictures. What's going on over there?
I'm in my barn, actually, to be totally honest, which is where I work. I live in a rural area in northern New England, and we have an old barn that we use for everything, basically, to store the boats. And my wife has her Peloton, and we have our studio in it, and, you know, bunk beds for people. And so, yeah, I live in my barn.
So you're kind of living the dream that you always wanted in a way. I mean, a couple of years ago, I've quoted this many times, quoted you actually many times. You walked into my house, opened the door to my garage, and I don't know if Fox News is going to want me to say the exact thing you said, but you basically said, holy effing shit, you've done it. Meaning that I had a studio at home and I was able to run my operation. You've kind of expanded into that world while still maintaining the mainstream cred.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I've always believed that what matters is how you live. You know, what's your life like? What do you do when you wake up? What time do you wake up? Who do you wake up with? I mean, those are the things that define your life. And so when I saw how you lived, I thought, man, this guy is really I mean, I know people who make a ton of money who don't live anywhere near as well as you do. And I was just so impressed by that. And a confluence of events happened. And we actually live in the town that we've been in our whole lives. So it's not, we didn't move anywhere weird. This is where, you know, we had a house here always growing up, but why not just move there? And so we did. And it's been wonderful.
Yeah, and you were dealing with some headaches living in some other places because, you know, obviously the media matters people and all the usual trolls and everything. They were sending people to your house and, you know, literally like going after your wife and kids and all that. I know it's not fun to talk about that, but can you just talk about it a little bit, just sort of relative to, you're just trying to do what you think is right as a journalist and as a personality, and then how it affects the life and the people around you?
Yeah, I mean, it was just sad to see it happen. I moved to Washington as a kid. My dad worked for the federal government and on the Cold War and doing pretty honorable things, I would say. I think that anyway. And so I've lived in Washington essentially my whole adult life, I mean, since high school. And it's a bipartisan town. I mean, by definition, both parties are represented. Both parties live there. And as a result, there's been this permanent truce effectively for decades where you can live next to people you disagree with, but you don't talk about it at dinner parties. You can be friends anyway. And I love that environment. A lot of my friends had politics different from mine. And then in 2016, Trump was such a threat. They were so worried. Not that Trump would actually do anything, and he really didn't, as we know. But he said stuff, and he said obvious stuff, and they were so terrified that Trump was going to point out some really obvious things about the way things actually work that they were completely threatened by him. I mean, really threatened by him. It was like a foreign power occupying the city, and the hatred, the bitterness. And I just kind of agreed with a lot of Trump's, I don't know, ideas maybe a little strong, but themes, you know, like, when you run the government, you should always ask yourself, is this helping the people who live here, who voted for me, who pay for all of this, whose country it is? I really agree with that. And I always have. So that the division in the city between the overwhelming majority of people who saw Trump as this satanic figure and the tiny minority of us who were like, well, yeah, okay, Trump, whatever, it's obvious, he's got all these personal faults, got it. But he's making really good points. Like, what is the point of NATO? Just pick one of 1,000 examples. Why shouldn't we have a border wall? What about all those people who died of fentanyl? Like, what's the answer? And all of a sudden, it just became impossible to live there. And then, I've never lived behind a gate or anything. We lived right on the street in the city. I raised my 4 kids there, and all of our dogs and all this stuff. And I felt like we were really part of the city. And then next thing you know, people are showing up at the house, and you can sort of see where this is going. It's so threatening. Where does it end? You're going to wind up shooting somebody. And I don't want to do that. I hate, but that's where it's going, because just living there was so provocative to them. Having them show up and threaten violence against my family was so threatening to me that it wasn't going to end well. And I just thought, and our 4th child went off to boarding school, and we didn't have any kids at home. And so we're like, well, wait, why don't we just move to where we already spend the summer? So we did.
Yeah. So do you think that the people that you're talking about there that are sort of the permanent DC class and the swamp, as Trump would call them, do you think it's a conscious decision that they're always existing to keep themselves in that power? Or is it just that you just get there and then before you know it, you're just in this thing and you like what's happening, so you just stay in that thing? So that's why he was the threat to it. And I would argue that in a weird way, now that Trump has stepped away, a lot of the hatred that was just always directed towards Trump is now directed more towards you because you're carrying the torch for some of those ideas.
Yeah, I'm not totally aware of that. I have a kind of peripheral sense that I'm disliked by some people, but I don't have a television. I don't go on the internet. I don't use social media. I'm pretty insulated from that stuff because why would I let
you literally don't? I know you don't check Twitter, but you literally don't have a television?
Oh no, I've never had a TV. No.
Wow.
No, I just didn't, I didn't grow up like that. And my dad worked in TV when I was a kid, and he was pretty pro reading, I would say. He was a militant reading person. So yeah, we had a lot of enforced reading in our house. And so that's how I grew up. But but mostly, I have a very close circle of friends, and I have a big family, and I'm really close to my wife and my producers, who I absolutely love. My executive producer, I'm really close to him. So I have a lot of people around me who will tell me the truth and do. If they think I'm being a douche or I'm crossing some line or whatever, they'll just say it. They're not afraid. They're not afraid of me at all. So unfortunately, so I feel like I've got a pretty good series of backstops against going totally crazy. And so, and I really care about their opinion because these are people I love and respect. And so my view has always been my whole life. I had a weird childhood, which kind of changed my view on this. But fundamentally, it was you should only care about the opinions of people who care about you and who have, demonstrated loyalty and wisdom and an ongoing relationship. Why would you ever let strangers have control of your emotional state? Like, that's insane. And, you hear people say that, but I think I'm in the rare category of people who mean it. So I would never go online and Google myself. Why would I do that?
No, I know you mean it. Right, exactly. I know you mean it because I think the first time we met in person, I asked you something about the hate and the Twitter mentions, and you're like, I don't have Twitter. Like, it's it's Tucker Carlson on Twitter. Where you're like, it's not, I'm not the one checking it and tweeting this stuff, and that keeps you kind of insulated and safe and sane.
And I have a huge number of people I talk to every day. I spend my whole life talking to people, mostly by text, but hundreds of people. And I try to clear my text every night. It was up till 2 a.m. in front of the fire where I live. It's cold on September 1st, and with my dogs, and I'm up really late, banging out these texts, taking notes. So I speak to a ton of people, and not just people in my world, not just famous rich people, but a lot of random people. A waitress that I had in Big Sur, and I hope she's watching this, I know she's a fan of yours, years ago, I gave her my text for some reason, and she and her husband are such thoughtful people, and she has been texting me ever since. And I swear, once a month, 2 nights ago, I used one of her lines on the air. Yeah. At least once a month, I'll run with a story idea she sends me. So I have a huge number of people that I correspond with, but I don't want to open it up to the mob. Because then I can't think clearly. And my whole job is, and I don't always pull it off, but I really try to think clearly, what is going on here? Ascend a little bit, get higher, look down. What are the outlines of this? And being involved in this, fuck you too, whoa. I don't like noise in my personal life. I like quiet, and I don't like noise in my work or intellectual life. I like to think. I like nature. I like hunting and fishing. I like to be outside. I don't want to sit in a room and read other people's hysteria. I don't think there's any upside to that at all.
First off, like, how bad you think really like the CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, WAPO machine is on one hand, but on the other hand, just like a little insider stuff on how you guys go about doing your show on a daily basis. Because I know your producers a little bit, and obviously I go on the show, and I find that you do the show in a way where it's like, you're almost doing like it almost feels more like a book than a TV show, where it's like each day you're doing something and then you sort of pick up the next day and pick up the next day. And I'm trying to do something similar here so that everything doesn't feel like this disconnected lunacy that everyone else is in. I'm just wondering a little bit about like the nuts and bolts about how you guys decide to do what you're going to do.
Well, I'm a writer, so that's how I think, in terms of chapters and, serials. This is a story, giving you one installment today, another tomorrow. It's just how my brain works. But as a practical matter, I wake up not too early, I hope. And with my wife and 4 dogs, I try and sit outside for a minute, get my head together. And then I write out a memo every morning for the whole staff on what I think the lead ought to be, who we should book. And we've got a whole pipe. We have some unbelievable people who work on the show, just really, really smart. I mean, really smart. And one of the people I talk to a lot, so, we've had, if I can brag, the same staff for 5 years. I think we've lost 1 person, 2 people, and it's a pretty big staff. And they're all in. They're so clever. They're so creative. They're so interesting. But one of our head tape guy is a guy called Tom Fox. The guy's just a freaking genius. And he really is my window into cable news. Like the poor guy is very smart, but he watches all this cable news. So he's constantly texting.
He drinks a lot, I'm guessing.
What?
He drinks a lot, I'm guessing.
I don't. He seems pretty sober, but I mean, maybe he's on pills. I don't know. But I I sit there with my, stupid glasses on and my phone, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, I honestly can't believe that. I cannot believe they would say this. So basically by like 11:30 in the morning, I've sketched out what I think the show should be. In my mind, it's always because, again, I was a reporter and a magazine writer. I think in terms of the lead, so my editor used to say to me when I was a kid, get in the lead. They're like, but what's the lead? Like, how do you open it up? What's the theme? And I try to, as an exercise that I've always, that I learned as a kid and I've always used, sum it up in a sentence. What's it about? Our first segment usually goes 20, 25 minutes. What's it about? One sentence. It's not about 8 things. It's about one thing. How would you summarize it? And that's a really helpful organizing principle for putting it together. And then, right around 5 o'clock, I try and take a sauna every day because I think it's really important.
Nice.
As Scandinavian, I'm true to my people. And I think about it in the sauna. Then I go out and I think about it more. And then I sit down around 5, have a cup of coffee, and I start writing the lead. And so that's basically it. But the media stuff is so shocking to me because I worked at CNN for years, and I hosted a couple shows there, several shows there. And then I was the main anchor in MSNBC for 4 years. I got fired. But, I still have a really good friend who will remain nameless who works there. Just a wonderful person, really good guy. And I have a couple of friends at CNN. So not a ton, 2. But anyway, I know that world really, really well. And the biggest surprise for me in one sentence is how illiberal they are. I always imagine there are liberal networks. No. I'm liberal. Okay. In the sense that, like, I believe in the Enlightenment and I believe in the Bill of Rights. And I think we do have rights. They are not liberals. They are defenders of the powerful, which is the much graver sin. Like, you can have silly politics. I get it. I've had silly politics. Maybe I do now. People make mistakes. But defending the billionaire class, blaming everything on like working class white people who are like, by far the most shafted people in America. Look at the suicide rate. Look at the death rate. I mean, it's like, it's measurable, but everything's their fault. It's insane. CNN ran a piece today saying white supremacists are applauding the Taliban. And it's like, okay, I don't even know what they're talking about. Who are these white? But leaving that aside, it's like, what are you really saying? You're saying The real problem with the withdrawal from Afghanistan was not terrible decisions that the Biden administration made or the Pentagon made, or that our entire foreign policy establishment, bipartisan, made for 20 years. No, the real problem is some guy in Alabama who's got unauthorized views. It's like, maybe you should stop attacking these people because they are the weakest people in our society, and you're doing it in order to defend like the shittiest people in our society, but also the richest and the most powerful. You're the Praetorian Guard for the most powerful people. Like, how can you live with yourself?
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about the media instead of nonstop yelling, check out our media playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out the full episode playlist. They're both right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.